Well, happy Friday. Hopefully you guys got some big plans for the weekend. For me, I'm just going to be kicking back and relaxing after another jam-packed week of information that we give you each and every weekday morning. And here we go with even more. It's another day in Illinois, and the ban on semi-automatic weapons continues, as does the litigation against that ban. And obviously, this is fast-moving targets, lots of moving pieces. We all feel like we're getting our junior law degree as we peel through all of the layers of this onion when it comes to the state's gun and magazine ban. So what I want to do now, heading into the weekend and early next week, we've got a lot of things to expect to happen next week, including the Illinois Supreme Court hearing the gun ban challenge brought by State Representative Dan Calkins, and that's going to be heard Tuesday by the Illinois Supreme Court, where they are going to hear the arguments about the law allegedly violating equal protections that are laid out in the Constitution to essentially say you can't carve out rights for some people and not allow others to have those same rights. And this pertains to the ban on certain semi-automatic weapons and magazines not applying to police officers, retired police officers, members that work in the security sector, jail guards, and the like. So that's the argument in the state level cases that are being heard next week by the Illinois Supreme Court. In that case brought by Dan Calkins, a state representative out of Decatur in Macon County. Now, that does have a temporary restraining order in place for Calkins and other named plaintiffs in Macon County. You have separate cases on the state level that are brought by attorney Thomas DeVore, and those cases are still pending. You've got DeVore with thousands of plaintiffs in his cases that have temporary restraining orders, keeping them safe from the state enforcing the gun and magazine ban, and that includes some gun dealers as well. So while those cases are still in the lower courts, with divorce cases, and he's seeking discovery from legislative leaders and third-party associations like the chiefs of police and also the Sheriff's Association in Illinois. So DeVore is trying to build the case down there to build a record to possibly take it to the next step to the Illinois Supreme Court, but the Illinois Supreme Court did not consolidate divorce cases with Calkins's case. Instead, they're only going to hear Calkins's case, and you even have a motion that the state made to essentially hold off on divorce cases while they debate and get an outcome in the Calkins case. And again, those are the state level cases. All of that deals with the idea of equal protections violations. And again, next week, Tuesday, the Illinois Supreme Court's going to hear those oral arguments. Now, on the federal cases, a lot of different moving pieces there. Of course, you've got the Southern District Court that put an injunction on the state's gun ban late April. That lasted for 6 days before the state requested a stay from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals issuing that stay. And Illinois State Police, they have put out more statements as to what all of that means. And if you go and check out the Illinois State Police's frequently asked questions page on the House Bill 5471, the Protect Illinois Communities Act, they just posted this from what I've gathered here. The ISP has indicated that persons who possess a banned firearm or firearm attachment are required to endorse an affidavit by January 1st, 2024, stating that any banned firearm or firearm attachments were possessed prior to the enactment of PICA. Now, we knew this already. That statement was already provided, but they just added this to their frequently asked question website. So if you click through that, you see it reiterates persons who possess as the result of a sale or transfer with a background check initiated to the Illinois State Police on or before January 10th, 2023, which allowed to be completed after the date pursuant to Section F, may complete the transaction. Required endorsement affidavit indicating possession prior to the statutorily required deadline. So obviously that's begging more questions. Below that, you see the frequently asked question about what the injunction means and the stay thereafter. What does that mean moving forward? That's essentially the statement we got from state police last week. Now, all of this obviously is begging a lot of questions from state legislators, including State Senator Jason Plummer, who earlier this week decried this whole back and forth, essentially alleging that the state and the Pritzker administration entrapped gun owners into a sticky situation, into a trick bag of sorts, because a lot of gun owners went and purchased firearms during that 6-day window because the federal judge enjoined the state from enforcing that gun ban. We heard some of what State Senator Jason Plummer had to say yesterday. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say, and in particular, I asked him about the concerns that gun stores and gun owners might have, especially with the state's Gun Dealer Licensing Act, which requires the state not just to have, requires gun dealers not in Illinois not just to have the federal firearms license, but also to have a state license, and that allows for state investigators to go to gun stores to check the books, so to speak. Is there a concern that you're going to see this possibly lead to people knocking on doors to go find firearms? That's a question I posed to State Senator Jason Plummer earlier this week. Here's what he had to say in response to that.
Well, none of us are here to give legal advice, right? That's first and foremost. We're not here to give legal advice.
And we'll make sure that he doesn't sound like Alvin Chipmunk there. Okay.
Well, I mean, none of us are up here to give legal advice, right? I mean, that's first and foremost. We're not here to give legal advice, but gun owners are absolutely petrified of the exact scenario that you just presented. Ultimately, what happens? Well, the law is clearly unconstitutional. Federal courts, I think, will take care of that. I'm concerned about what happens until that happens, right? And unfortunately, you have, as Senator Bryant just eloquently lined out, you had an Attorney General's office that was eager to comment and issue information when everything was going in their favor. When they got a negative ruling against their political position, which everyone kind of knew was going to happen, they intentionally just sat there silent. That was completely a dereliction of duty by the Attorney General. You're asking us for legal advice. The Attorney General is supposed to be providing legal advice, and all he's issuing is congratulatory press releases to his political allies. It's absolutely shameful.
And again, that legal advice posted to State Police's frequently asked question websites says that weapons or firearms that were purchased during the 6-day injunction, they are not eligible to be registered if the law is upheld and people are required to register their firearms by January 1st of 2024. Again, Governor J.B. Pritzker earlier this week responded to Senator Plummer and to my question as well as to, is he going to, quote, go after people? And here is what the governor had to say in response to that concern that gun owners and gun stores have.
Well, what the law says is that as of January 1 of 2024, that people will need to fill out the affidavit that they have one of those guns. That's really all it is. There's nobody going after anybody, but that is what the law says.
So Governor Pritzker essentially saying that's what the law says, that individuals shouldn't be in possession of firearms after the enactment date of the law. But again, there's always, even you watching on YouTube or people on social media, when this discussion comes up, there's always that question of the double standard. And we'll talk about the migrant issue coming up. But a lot of you say, well, people are critical of sheriffs for not wanting to enforce this law they see as unconstitutional, but the state doesn't enforce immigration law. That's one point I always hear from gun owners. Another point is, some of you are looking to move out of Illinois if this law is maintained and you have to register a firearm. I've seen a lot of comments to that effect as well. Well, I asked State Senator Jason Plummer and State Senator Neil Anderson to respond to those statements that a lot of gun owners are making.
I'm happy to, Neil or Terry. I think if it's upheld, we're a party and we're a political persuasion that respects the rule of law. And that's our concern here. I respect the rule of law when it comes to firearms. I respect the rule of law when it comes to the border. I respect the rule of law when it comes to citizenship. Unlike the governor, I don't pick and choose when the law matters. The law matters every day, and the governor needs to, follow that lead.
Great. That's exactly why we're here, right? We understand the rule of law, and we believe in the rule of law. And when a federal judge says that law, we're putting an injunction on it because I believe it's unconstitutional. That's why we're here. Because those people that bought those firearms in that period have no direction. They're only being told by the Attorney General and by the governor that you are criminals, and that's not right.
So coming up, we'll kind of review where we're at in the federal cases with legal filings in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, the questions of whether or not there's going to be consolidation, and then also where we're at with the U.S. Supreme Court. So we'll touch on those things next here on WMAY. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop, broadcasting each and every weekday morning from 6 to 9 here on WMAY on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. So thanks for everybody for tuning in. All right. All right, let's get on into the issues surrounding where we're at in the status of various challenges against Illinois' gun ban. We talked last segment about the state Supreme Court hearing the oral arguments Tuesday here in Springfield about the state's gun ban violating, allegedly, the Equal Protections Clause of our Constitution. But in the federal courts, you've got a lot of moving pieces, and these challenge the state and local gun bans on the grounds of Second Amendment violations. And taking a look at the Caleb case, which is the case from the Southern District that wraps in 4 cases altogether brought by plaintiffs groups. Looking at the docket here, of course, this was in the Southern District. An injunction was put in place, and then you had the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals granting a stay. So the state defendant's emergency motion for a stay was ultimately granted earlier this month, leading to a lot of questions. But then you had an order for the possibility of consolidating these cases, and you have filings that have been put into the docket for a whole host of different groups and plaintiffs and defendants and so on. And this is where you see the questions raised of whether or not it's good to go ahead and consolidate these cases. So that's where we're at with the Caleb case. Of course, the stays in place, reversing the injunction, and you'll see that play out in the courts as well. But one of the responses here is from attorney Thomas Magg, and he files a response to the overall case in general. And I want to read from this. It's a short filing. It's only 8 pages, double spaced. But Thomas Magg, he says in his argument that, let me get to, here we are. An initial matter, defendants should have proceeded with their request, the state should have proceeded with their request to stay the preliminary injunction in the district court before presenting the same here. Instead, they jump straight to the Circuit Court of Appeals without giving the district court a chance to consider the issue. This alone is enough to justify not staying the district court preliminary injunction. As to merits, the Second Amendment protects arms that are commonly possessed by law-abiding citizens and lawful purposes, especially but not limited to self-defense in the home. That's according to the Bruin decision. Goes on to say that the arms banned by the state are purposed by millions, possessed by millions, if not tens of millions of law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, including self-defense and elsewhere. Under the Supreme Court's precedents, that is all that's needed for citizens to have a right under the Second Amendment to keep such weapons. This cannot be the slightest question. Therefore, the challenge laws are unconstitutional. This court asked the plaintiffs to discuss the bearing of this court's pre-Bruin decisions. Wilson is decided on the basis that Friedman was allegedly controlling. And this is where you've got the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals essentially saying, hey, respond to my stay, but respond to it using the arguments from previous precedent without considering Bruin. So Magg, he goes on to say, under proper Bruin analysis, it's likely that most of the restrictions this court has previously upheld will and should fail. He goes on to really, in a way, eviscerate the stay. And that's obviously going to be an ongoing concern when it comes to how this case proceeds. So that's in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. You also have the Naperville case, which there's been a lot of filings there. And the Naperville case, you have amici briefs out the wazoo, if that's a proper statement here. But amici briefs by Everytown for gun safety, amici briefs by the Giffords Law Center, the Alliance to Prevent Gun Violence, and several others filed. And that's in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals as well. But the Naperville case is also in the U.S. Supreme Court. And you've got the U.S. Supreme Court's Justice Amy Coney Barrett accepting an emergency motion for injunctive relief pending the lawsuit continuing, and Amy Coney Barrett having the docket here with the U.S. Supreme Court. You've got the reply from the National Association for Gun Rights, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois filing an amicus brief in there as well, but also the state of Illinois and Naperville filing their response. So what happens next? You've got the Supreme Courts. They have conferences, and those conferences meet every Thursday until the end of the court session, I believe, in late June. So it's possible that Amy Coney Barrett could issue that emergency relief, or she could go to the conference and ask for the Supreme Court to issue that emergency relief. Whether or not that happens, still very much up in the air because of the questions of whether this case is ripe or not. Or could the U.S. Supreme Court say this is a question that's really prescient because you've got civil liberties being hindered through the court's previous precedent of under Bruin, saying that you cannot ban commonly owned firearms. So obviously, everybody's waiting to see what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's just a layman's understanding of where we're at with all of these cases heading into the weekend and what we could possibly see pop out early next week with the oral arguments in the Illinois Supreme Court, with the possible outcomes of what happens with consolidation for the Southern District cases, with the Northern District cases in federal court, and also what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court and the motion for an emergency injunction against the state's gun and magazine ban. But all of this, as you stare down the deadline, that window, October 1st to January 1st, for people to register their firearms that they owned before January 10th of 2023. And that's a deadline I think a lot of people are looking for because it could take a while for even the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to go through all of the arguments and all of the briefs in these cases. So if that takes, a year, then that puts us beyond that deadline of January 1st. So I think a lot of gun owners are looking for an injunction to be sustained during the proceedings so that they don't have to be under threat of, criminal penalties for not filing an affidavit with the state police saying that they own guns that are banned by state law. So there's a lot of concerns there. We'll be tracking this obviously all next week as well. So very much appreciate everybody tuning in, and hopefully you're getting some benefit from the continued coverage here of what's going on with Illinois' gun and magazine ban in the courts.